is great.
The Oscars may crown the best films of the year, but before a single winner is announced, another battle quietly steals the spotlight. It happens under flashing cameras on a strip of red carpet where every step is calculated, every look dissected. This is where elegance collides with risk, where icons are made or questioned in seconds. Some arrive to mesmerize, others to shock. And by the end of the night, one question lingers: who truly won before the show even began? Kathy Bates, the grace that outlasts every trend. In a night dominated by spectacle, bold risks, and relentless reinvention, Kathy Bates stepped onto the red carpet with something far more powerful: certainty. No need to shock, no desire to compete with the chaos, just presence. And somehow that made her impossible to overlook. Draped in a silver-gray Vera Wang gown, she embodied a kind of elegance that doesn't chase attention, it earns it over time. The satin fabric moved with a quiet fluidity, catching the light in soft reflections rather than blinding flashes. Subtle beading traced the design with precision, adding depth without ever overwhelming the silhouette. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was assured. But what truly held the moment together wasn't the gown, it was her. The way she stood, the way she carried the simplicity like it was a choice, not a limitation. There was history in that presence, experience, a sense that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. And that's where the intrigue lives. Because in a room full of people trying to define the moment, Kathy Bates reminded everyone of something far more enduring: true style doesn't expire. It evolves, it deepens, and eventually it becomes untouchable. Zoe Saldana, the edge beneath the elegance. At first glance, Zoe Saldana gave the red carpet exactly what it expects: elegance, control, precision. But look closer and something sharper begins to emerge. This wasn't just another polished appearance. It was a quiet disruption hidden beneath a perfectly composed exterior. Wearing Saint Laurent, Zoe stepped into a look that played a dangerous game between softness and edge. The lace bodice introduced texture, delicate at first sight, almost romantic. But it didn't stay there. The structure beneath it, clean, streamlined, intentional, pulled the entire silhouette into something far more modern, almost severe in its precision. It was beauty with a backbone. There was no excess here. No unnecessary volume, no dramatic flourishes. Every detail felt edited, stripped down to its most essential form. And that's exactly what made it powerful. Because while others leaned into spectacle, Zoe leaned into control. Into tension. Into that fine line where elegance starts to feel just a little bit dangerous. And maybe that's what made it linger. Not because it demanded attention, but because it held something back. A sense that beneath the calm surface there was something sharper, more intentional, waiting to be noticed. Because Zoe Saldana didn't just show up looking refined. She showed up with an edge, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Leonardo DiCaprio and Vittoria Ceretti, the couple who didn't need the spotlight to own it. They didn't walk the red carpet together, no coordinated entrance, no carefully staged moment for the cameras. And yet somehow Leonardo DiCaprio and Vittoria Ceretti became one of the most talked about presences of the night. Because sometimes what doesn't happen speaks louder than anything that does. Leonardo stayed exactly where you expect him to be, sharp, composed, untouchable in his signature black tuxedo. No risks, no surprises, just the quiet confidence of a man who knows he doesn't need to chase attention. But then there was Vittoria. Draped in a deep burgundy gown that felt rich, almost intoxicating, she brought a different kind of energy, refined, controlled, but undeniably magnetic. The color alone set her apart like a slow-burning statement in a room full of predictable black and white. And when they finally appeared inside the ceremony together, it clicked. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about timing, about choosing the exact moment to be seen. For many, it felt like more than just another appearance. It felt like a quiet confirmation, a subtle shift in a relationship long kept just out of reach. No grand reveal, no dramatic pose, just presence, precision, and a question lingering in the air: was this their soft debut or the beginning of something far more intentional? Timothée Chalamet and Kylie Jenner, the rule breakers who stole the room. They didn't arrive together. No shared walk, no coordinated entrance, no obvious headline moment on the red carpet. And yet the second Timothée Chalamet and Kylie Jenner appeared inside the ceremony, the energy in the room shifted. It was instant, unavoidable, like two different worlds colliding in perfect, calculated chaos. Timothée stepped away from tradition the moment he chose an all-white Givenchy suit, sharp, unconventional, and impossible to ignore. But it was the sunglasses that sealed it. Indoors. At the Oscars. In a sea of black tuxedos, he didn't just stand out, he disrupted the entire visual rhythm of the room. It wasn't about fitting in, it was about rewriting the code. And then there was Kylie. If Timothy was the disruption, she was the impact. Her sculpted red Schiaparelli gown didn't just command attention, it captured it. The structure, the color, the sheer confidence of the look turned her into an instant focal point, like a flash of fire cutting through polished elegance. Together, they didn't need a red carpet moment to define them. Because once inside, they became the moment. Bold, unpredictable, and impossible to overlook. And in a night built on tradition, they left one question hanging in the air: what happens when breaking the rules becomes the most powerful statement of all? Jessie Buckley, the unexpected twist that shouldn't have worked but did. At first glance, it felt like a contradiction. Jessie Buckley stepped onto the red carpet in a Chanel design that seemed to break its own rules, a bold red neckline colliding with a soft pink skirt, two tones that shouldn't quite belong together. It wasn't the kind of harmony you expect at the Oscars. It was sharper, more playful, almost risky in its simplicity. And for a moment you wondered, was this a misstep or something far more intentional? But then she moved, and suddenly the look began to make sense. The red didn't overpower it. Framed, the pink didn't fade, it softened. Together they created a tension that pulled the eye in, refusing to let go. It wasn't loud, not in the way some of the night's more dramatic gowns demanded attention. Instead, it worked quietly, almost cleverly, revealing its impact the longer you looked. There was a certain confidence in choosing something that didn't immediately seek approval. No obvious glamour, no predictable silhouette, just a subtle disruption of expectation. And somehow Jessie carried it with ease, as if the contrast itself was part of her story. In a night full of calculated perfection, her look stood out for a different reason. It didn't try to be flawless. It tried to be interesting, and maybe that's what made it linger. Because sometimes the most captivating choices aren't the ones that make sense right away, but the ones that stay with you long after you've looked away. Nicole Kidman. When perfection falters but presence prevails. Nicole Kidman arrived with the kind of anticipation only true icons carry: the expectation of perfection, of effortless dominance on the red carpet. And at first glance, it seemed she delivered. The Chanel gown, with its soft, pale tone and intricate construction, had all the ingredients of high fashion. But then something felt off. A subtle disruption in the silhouette, a pronounced peplum that cut through the flow of the dress, breaking the harmony just enough to make you look twice and not entirely in admiration. It wasn't a failure, not even close. But it was uneasy. The design hovered in that delicate space between bold and awkward, where intention doesn't fully translate into impact. The structure interrupted the natural elegance the gown was trying to achieve, creating a tension you couldn't quite ignore. And yet, despite it all, Nicole stood there, composed, untouchable, completely in control. Because here's the truth: when you are Nicole Kidman, the dress doesn't define you, you define the dress. Her presence softened the flaws, her confidence carried the moment, and suddenly what could have been a misstep became something far more interesting. Not perfection, but power, and sometimes that's even more captivating. Kate Hudson, the quiet power of timeless glamour. In a sea of risk drama and daring fashion experiments, Kate Hudson chose a different kind of statement, the kind that doesn't shout but lingers. The moment she stepped onto the red carpet, there was no shock factor, no attempt to disrupt the room. And yet somehow all eyes still found their way to her. Draped in a mint green Armani Privé gown, she embodied a kind of classic Hollywood elegance that feels almost rare in today's landscape of high-impact fashion. At first glance it seemed simple, but the longer you looked, the more it revealed itself. The sculpted peplum detail carved out a precise, structured silhouette, giving the gown a quiet authority. The shimmering texture caught the light just enough, never overwhelming, never fading, like a controlled glow designed to draw you in slowly rather than all at once. It wasn't about making a loud entrance, it was about owning the space without needing to prove anything. And that's where the intrigue lies. Because in a night where so many were trying to be unforgettable, Kate Hudson reminded everyone of a different kind of power, the kind rooted in confidence, restraint, and absolute control. No risks, no chaos, just perfection. And sometimes that's the most dangerous move of all. EJA. The first win, the first statement. For some, the Oscars are about legacy. For EJA, this night was about arrival. Winning Best Original Song for Golden is already a career-defining moment, but stepping onto the red carpet in a shimmering Dior gown, she made sure the celebration didn't stop at the trophy. It began the second she appeared. The dress caught the light with every movement, almost like it was alive, reflecting Flash's camera's attention. It wasn't just sparkle, it was intention. A statement that said, "This is not luck, this is a moment earned." There was a certain electricity in the way she carried it, a quiet awareness that everything had changed and everyone was watching. What made it even more compelling was the balance. The gown didn't overpower her, it amplified her. It framed the confidence of someone stepping into a new chapter right in front of the world. No hesitation, no holding back, just presence. Because this wasn't just about looking beautiful, it was about marking a transition from rising artist to Oscar winner, from potential to proof. And as the lights hit that Dior gown, one thing became clear. This wasn't just her first win, it was the beginning of a much bigger story. Audrey Nuna. The night fashion turned into pure theater. Some people arrive at the Oscars to be seen. Audrey Nuna arrived to be remembered. The moment she stepped onto the red carpet, it was clear this wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a performance. Wrapped in a dramatic custom Tom Brown ball gown, she transformed the space around her into something bigger, almost cinematic. The silhouette was impossible to ignore. Voluminous, architectural, unapologetically bold, it didn't follow the rules of traditional red carpet elegance. It challenged them. Every inch of the gown felt intentional, from its exaggerated structure to its couture precision, like a piece of wearable art designed not for comfort but for impact. This wasn't about blending in, it was about standing alone. And yet what made it truly compelling wasn't just the scale, it was the attitude. Audrey didn't get lost inside the gown. She controlled it, owned it, moved with a confidence that turned something potentially overwhelming into something magnetic. The kind of presence that makes people pause, look twice, and then keep looking. In a night full of beauty, her look pushed into something else entirely, something more daring, more theatrical, more unforgettable. Because Audrey Nuna didn't just show up in couture, she brought drama, structure, and bold intention, and in doing so reminded everyone that fashion at its best isn't just seen, it's felt. Elle Fanning. The illusion of a modern-day fairy tale. In a night driven by spectacle, risk, and calculated drama, Elle Fanning chose something far more dangerous: softness. And somehow it worked. The moment she stepped onto the red carpet, it felt as if time slowed down, like she had walked out of a different world entirely. Draped in a delicate Givenchy ball gown, she didn't demand attention, she invited it. The fabric moved like a whisper. Light, airy, almost weightless, it created a silhouette that felt less constructed and more imagined, like something pulled straight from the pages of a storybook. There was no harsh structure, no aggressive design, just layers of quiet elegance that built a presence impossible to ignore. It wasn't trying to compete with the boldest looks of the night, it didn't need to. What made it truly captivating was how natural it felt on her. This wasn't a costume. It was an extension of who she is, romantic, ethereal, effortlessly in tune with the fantasy she embodies. In a space where so many were pushing boundaries, Elle leaned into something timeless and made it feel fresh again. Because in a room full of noise, she chose stillness. And somehow that stillness echoed louder than anything else. Anne Hathaway. The return of old Hollywood power. Some stars chase trends. Stars chase. Anne Hathaway, doesn't she revives eras? The moment she stepped onto the Oscars red carpet, it felt like a portal had opened to a different time, where glamour wasn't experimental, it was absolute. Draped in a Valentino gown adorned with intricate floral embroidery paired with long, elegant gloves, she didn't just arrive, she reintroduced a standard many had forgotten. At first glance, it was classic. But the longer you looked, the more it revealed its quiet dominance. The structure of the gown was precise, sculpted to perfection, holding its shape with a confidence that didn't need exaggeration. The embroidery added depth detail that rewarded attention rather than demanding it. And those gloves, timeless, deliberate, sealed the illusion of a star untouched by fleeting trends. There was no risk here, no shock factor, and that's exactly what made it powerful. In a night filled with bold statements and experimental silhouettes, Anne chose certainty, control, legacy. She didn't need to compete with the moment. She reminded everyone that she belongs to it. It was a statement wrapped in elegance. True style doesn't chase relevance, it defines it. Chase Infinity, the breakout moment no one saw coming. Every Oscars has that one moment, the one where a rising name steps onto the red carpet and suddenly everything shifts. This year that moment belonged to Chase Infinity. She didn't just arrive, she announced herself, and the industry felt it. Draped in a custom lavender Louis Vuitton gown, she walked in with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't beg for attention, it earns it. The color alone set her apart. Soft, romantic, almost dreamlike, it created an immediate contrast against the predictable palette of black, silver, and red surrounding her. But this wasn't just about color, it was about construction. Layers of delicate ruffles moved with her, catching the light in subtle waves, building a silhouette that felt both youthful and commanding at the same time. What made it truly compelling was the balance. There was innocence in the softness, but also ambition in the scale of the gown. It didn't overwhelm her, it elevated her. Every detail seemed to say the same thing: this is only the beginning. Because that's what the red carpet does at its best, it introduces the next chapter before anyone is ready. And in that moment, Chase Infinity wasn't just a nominee. She was a presence, a question, a promise. And if this was her first real statement, the real intrigue is what comes next. Amy Madigan, the quiet authority of a woman who needs no introduction. In a night driven by spectacle, rising stars, and bold fashion risks, Amy Madigan chose something far more dangerous: restraint. Fresh off her Best Supporting Actress win for Weapons, she stepped onto the red carpet not to compete for attention, but to own her place within it. And somehow that made her impossible to ignore. Dressed in a classic Dior gown, she embraced a silhouette that didn't chase trends or demand validation. It was refined, controlled, and deeply intentional. The clean lines, the understated structure, the absence of unnecessary embellishment. All of it spoke the same language: confidence that doesn't need decoration. This wasn't about reinvention. It was about presence. There was a quiet gravity in the way she carried herself. No dramatic poses, no calculated attempts to capture headlines. Just a calm, unwavering elegance that felt almost rare in a room full of noise. It was the kind of energy that doesn't fade with time, it deepens. Because Amy Madigan wasn't trying to be the moment. She is the kind of presence that defines moments. And in a night obsessed with being seen, she reminded everyone of something far more powerful. True impact doesn't need to announce itself, it simply exists and the world adjusts around it. Teyana Taylor, the moment that refused to be ignored. Some looks ask for attention. Teyana Taylor's demanded it. The second she stepped onto the red carpet, it was clear this wasn't just fashion. This was performance, attitude, and control woven into one unforgettable statement. In a night filled with elegance and restraint, she chose the opposite: bold, theatrical, unapologetically present. Feathers, sheer panels, shimmer, every element of her look pushed the boundaries of what a red carpet gown is supposed to be. It wasn't about fitting into the Oscars aesthetic. It was about bending it. The textures caught the light in unpredictable ways, the silhouette shifted as she moved, and the overall effect felt almost alive, like the outfit itself had a pulse. But what truly made it electric wasn't just the design, it was her. The confidence, the posture, the way she carried every detail like it belonged to her and no one else. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. Just a clear message. Watch me. In a room where many played it safe, Teyana chose risk and turned it into power. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't the most perfect ones. They're the ones bold enough to take over the entire conversation. Gwyneth Paltrow, The Power of Restraint, or the Risk of Disappearing. In a night built on spectacle where volume, shimmer, and drama fought for dominance, Gwyneth Paltrow made a choice that felt almost rebellious in its own way. She went quiet. No theatrical silhouette, no overwhelming embellishment, no desperate reach for attention. Instead, she stepped onto the red carpet in a sleek Giorgio Armani Privé gown that whispered elegance rather than announcing it. At first glance, it was flawless. The clean lines, the polished structure, the almost surgical precision of the tailoring, it was minimalism at its highest level. A look designed not to distract but to refine. And for a moment it worked. There was a calm confidence in the simplicity, a sense that she didn't need to compete with the noise around her. But then the question began to surface. In a room where everyone was fighting to be remembered, was this too restrained, too controlled? The gown didn't fail, it just didn't push. It stayed safe, composed perfectly within its limits. And that's where the tension lies. Because Gwyneth Paltrow didn't get it wrong, she just chose not to go far enough. And in a night defined by boldness, that choice becomes its own kind of risk. Because sometimes the most dangerous place to stand is right in the middle. Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons, the couple who mastered the art of saying less. In a room filled with spectacle, shimmer, and carefully calculated drama, Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons did something almost radical. They stepped back. No theatrics, no attention-grabbing risks, no desperate need to dominate the spotlight. And yet somehow they became one of the most quietly compelling presences of the night. Kirsten appeared in a sculptural black Celine gown that felt both modern and timeless. Clean lines controlled structure, and a silhouette that didn't chase trends, it defined its own space. There was a quiet confidence in the simplicity, a sense that every detail had been refined down to only what mattered. Nothing extra. Nothing wasted. Beside her, Jesse mirrored that same philosophy. His sleek black tailoring from Lardini didn't try to compete, it aligned. Sharp, precise, and understated, it created a visual harmony that felt effortless, almost instinctive. Together, they didn't just complement each other, they balanced. And that's what made it so intriguing. In a night where everyone was trying to be seen, they chose to be understood. No loud statements, no obvious drama, just control, connection, and a shared sense of ease that felt real. Because sometimes the most powerful presence isn't the one that demands attention, it's the one that holds it without ever asking. Demi Moore, the woman who turned the red carpet into a stage. Demi Moore didn't just walk the Oscars red carpet, she staged a moment. The instant she appeared, it felt less like a fashion choice and more like a calculated act of spectacle. Draped in a dramatic feathered Gucci gown, she blurred the line between couture and performance. Every step carried movement, every turn caught the light, the feathers almost breathing around her as if the dress had a life of its own. It was bold, dangerously bold, the kind of look that could easily tip into excess, and yet somehow Demi made it feel controlled, intentional, even elegant. There was something almost defiant in the way she wore it. No hesitation, no apology. While others played it safe, she leaned into theatricality, daring the audience to look away, and they couldn't. The texture, the volume, the sheer presence of the gown demanded attention, but it was Demi who anchored it, who kept it from unraveling into chaos. In a night full of polished glamour, her look stood right on the edge between risk and artistry, between fashion and performance. And that's exactly why it lingered. Because Demi Moore didn't just wear a dress, she delivered a statement. One that quietly dares, what if the only way to be remembered is to go further than anyone else is willing to go? Emma Stone. When effortless beauty slips into unexpected silence. Emma Stone is usually the kind of presence you can trust on a red carpet, the one who never misses, never hesitates, always delivers that perfect balance of charm and sophistication. But this time, something felt different. The moment she stepped out in her sparkling Louis Vuitton gown, there was a flicker of surprise, not the explosive kind, but a quieter, more puzzling reaction. The dress shimmered under the lights, yes, but its loose, almost languid silhouette carried an unexpected softness reminiscent of a Regency-era nightgown, rather than a statement piece built for Hollywood's biggest stage. It wasn't a bad look. In fact, on anyone else, it might have been praised for its understated grace. But on Emma Stone, it felt almost too relaxed, too distant from the sharp, polished energy she's known for. There was no dramatic edge, no defining moment that demanded attention. Instead, the look seemed to drift gentle, airy, and strangely quiet in a room full of spectacle. And maybe that's what made it so intriguing. Because for someone who rarely gets it wrong, this wasn't a failure, it was a question mark, a rare pause in a flawless streak. In a night built on impact, Emma Stone chose subtlety, and in doing so left everyone wondering, was this restraint, or was it the one time she let the moment slip, just slightly out of her grasp? Odessa A'zion, the red carpet rebel who refused to blend in. The Oscars. Red carpet has its own unspoken rules: long gowns, polished silhouettes, timeless elegance. Odessa A'zion looked at all of that and chose to ignore it. The moment she stepped into view, it was clear she wasn't here to follow tradition. She was here to rewrite the mood entirely. Instead of a classic gown, she appeared in a sparkling Valentino rhinestone wrap jacket paired with a rich velvet skirt, a combination that felt more like high fashion week than Hollywood ceremony. It was sharp, unexpected, and slightly disruptive, like she had stepped out of a different world and onto the wrong carpet on purpose. The jacket caught the light with a fierce intensity, every rhinestone flashing under the cameras, while the velvet skirt grounded the look with a darker, more controlled weight. It was a clash of textures, a push and pull between glamour and tailoring, chaos and structure. And somehow it worked because she made it work. What made the moment truly compelling wasn't just the outfit, but the attitude behind it. There was no attempt to soften the edges, no desire to conform. She leaned into the contrast, into the risk, into the possibility of standing out for all the right and maybe even wrong reasons. Because Odessa A'zion didn't just bend the rules, she stepped outside of them entirely. And in a night built on expectation, that kind of rebellion becomes impossible to ignore. Kristen Wiig, the subtle seduction of effortless elegance. Not every red carpet moment needs to shout to be heard. Kristen Wiig proved that sometimes the most captivating presence is the one that almost slips by unnoticed until it doesn't. The moment she appeared, there was no explosion of drama, no overwhelming spectacle. Just a quiet pull, subtle, controlled, and unexpectedly magnetic. Wearing a sleek silk evening gown, she leaned into a kind of elegance that felt both classic and quietly modern. The fabric draped effortlessly, catching light in soft, fluid movements, while delicate cutout details introduced just enough intrigue to break the surface. It wasn't obvious. It didn't need to be. The beauty of the look lived in its restraint, in what it chose not to reveal all at once. There was a warmth to the overall tone, a bronzed, almost sun-kissed glow that gave the entire appearance a sense of ease. As if she hadn't tried too hard, and yet everything landed exactly where it should. That balance between simplicity and intention is what made it so compelling. Because in a night filled with bold statements and high-risk fashion, Kristen Wiig chose a different kind of power. One rooted in confidence and subtlety, in knowing exactly how much to give and how much to hold back. And that's the intrigue. Because sometimes the looks that don't demand attention are the ones you keep thinking about long after they're gone. Demi Moore, the woman who turned the red carpet into a stage. Demi Moore didn't just walk the Oscars red carpet, she staged a moment. The instant she appeared, it felt less like a fashion choice and more like a calculated act of spectacle. Draped in a dramatic feathered Gucci gown, she blurred the line between couture and performance. Every step carried movement, every turn caught the light, the feathers almost breathing around her as if the dress had a life of its own. It was bold, dangerously bold, the kind of look that could easily tip into excess, and yet somehow Demi made it feel controlled, intentional, even elegant. There was something almost defiant in the way she wore it. No hesitation, no apology. While others played it safe, she leaned into theatricality, daring the audience to look away, and they couldn't. The texture, the volume, the sheer presence of the gown demanded attention, but it was Demi who anchored it, who kept it from unraveling into chaos. In a night full of polished glamour, her look stood right on the edge between risk and artistry, between fashion and performance. And that's exactly why it lingered. Because Demi Moore didn't just wear a dress, she delivered a statement. One that quietly dares, what if the only way to be remembered is to go further than anyone else is willing to go? Amy Madigan, the comeback no one saw coming. 40 years. Let that sink in. While most Hollywood careers rise, peak, and quietly fade, Amy Madigan just pulled off the kind of twist that feels like it was written by an overly dramatic screenwriter on 3 cups of coffee. When her name was announced for Best Supporting Actress, the room didn't just clap, it exploded. Because this wasn't just a win, it was history knocking loudly and saying, yeah, I'm still here. Her role as Aunt Gladys wasn't supposed to dominate the night, but somehow it did. With a performance that balanced wild humor and sharp emotional edges, Madigan turned every second on screen into something you couldn't look away from. The kind of character that makes you laugh and then question your life choices 5 seconds later. And then came the speech. Instead of a polished PR-approved moment, Madigan gave us something far more dangerous: honesty. She joked about shaving her legs the night before because apparently even Oscar winners panic last minute, stumbled through her thoughts, and then boom, hit everyone right in the heart. Her tribute to her husband Ed Harris wasn't just sweet, it was real. Messy, long-lasting, deeply human love. At 75, Amy Madigan didn't just win an Oscar. She reminded everyone in that room and watching at home that sometimes the best stories don't happen fast. They take 4 decades to land the perfect ending. Paul Thomas Anderson, the quiet genius who took over the night. No loud entrance, no over-the-top speech, no viral moment, and yet somehow Paul Thomas Anderson walked away as one of the most powerful forces of the night. That's the thing about him: while everyone else is busy chasing the spotlight, he's busy owning it without making a sound. Winning both Best Director and Adapted Screenplay for one battle after another. Anderson didn't just collect trophies, he quietly built a legacy right in front of everyone. And the wildest part? He still looked like a guy who wasn't entirely convinced he should be up there. While most winners are busy thanking half of Hollywood and their childhood pets, Anderson kept it simple, almost suspiciously humble, like a man who just accidentally discovered he's a genius. But make no mistake, this wasn't luck. This was precision. Every frame, every line, every choice in his film felt intentional, calculated, almost surgical. The kind of storytelling that doesn't scream for attention but slowly traps you until you realize you can't look away. And here's where it gets interesting. While the night seemed like a battlefield between sinners and one battle after another, Anderson played it like a chess master. No drama, no noise, just checkmate. Because in a room full of stars trying to shine the brightest, Paul Thomas Anderson proved something far more dangerous: you don't need to be the loudest when you're the smartest in the room. Ryan Coogler, the speech that almost stole the show. Some wins feel expected. This one felt like a moment about to spiral into something unforgettable. When Ryan Coogler stepped on stage to accept Best Original Screenplay for Sinners, you could already tell this was not going to be one of those quick, polished thank you and goodbye speeches. No, this had energy, the kind that makes producers nervously look at the clock. And Coogler delivered. He walked up looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed, like a man who had a lot to say and knew he probably should not say all of it. But he tried anyway. And honestly, that is what made it great. His voice carried emotion, nerves, and just enough humor to keep the audience leaning in. At one point, he even admitted they might have to cut him off because where he comes from, people talk a lot. And judging by the crowd reaction, nobody wanted him to stop. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Instead of keeping the spotlight on himself, Coogler turned around and called his entire cast and crew to stand up. Suddenly, this was not just about one man winning an Oscar. It became about a team, a journey, a shared victory. You could feel the room soften. Even the biggest stars in the audience looked genuinely moved. And just when you thought he was done, he brought it back home. Family, gratitude, roots. The kind of ending that does not need dramatic music because it already hits exactly where it should. In a night full of big wins and bigger egos, Ryan Coogler did something rare. He made it personal, and somehow that made it bigger than everything else. Autumn Durald Arkapaw, the shot that changed everything. Some wins make you clap. This one made history stand up and pay attention. When Autumn Durald Archipaw's name was announced for Best Cinematography, there was a split second of silence, like the room needed time to process what just happened. And then, boom! Applause, cheers, and that unmistakable feeling that something bigger than an award had just gone down. Because this was not just a win. This was the first time a woman and a woman of color ever took this category. Let that sink in. In an industry built on images, she just changed what the future behind the camera looks like. And the wild part, she did it without screaming for attention. Her work in Sinners did all the talking. Every frame felt alive. Every shot pulled you in like it had something to confess. The kind of cinematography that does not just show you a story, it makes you feel like you are trapped inside it in the best way possible. Then she got on stage. Emotional, grounded, real. She thanked Ryan Coogler, and you could feel the respect between them. Not Hollywood fake nice. Real trust. Real collaboration. But the moment that truly landed, she asked all the women in the room to stand. And suddenly, this was not just her victory anymore. It became a shared moment. A quiet but powerful shift. In a night full of big names and big speeches, Autumn Durald Arkapaw proved something unforgettable. Sometimes the biggest impact comes from the person behind the lens, the one who sees everything before the world does. Jessie Buckley, the chaos that felt too real. Some performances impress you. This one sneaks up on you and then refuses to let go. When Jessie Buckley's name was announced for Best Actress for Hamnet, the reaction was not just applause, it was that quiet kind of respect, the kind that says, yeah, that one hit different. Because Buckley did not just play a role, she lived in it. Her performance carried something raw, something unpredictable. Like you were watching a heartbeat in real time, slightly out of rhythm, slightly dangerous. The kind of acting that makes you forget you are watching a movie and then suddenly remember when it hurts the most. And then she got on stage. No dramatic pause, no over-rehearsed speech, just emotion barely held together. She dedicated the award to the chaos of a mother's heart, and somehow that line alone felt bigger than the entire ceremony. It was messy, honest, and just poetic enough to make everyone stop and listen. Then came the turn. She shifted from vulnerability to something unexpectedly playful, thanking her husband with a line that felt half romantic, half chaotic energy. Talking about love, family, and wanting thousands of more babies like it was the most normal thing to say on the biggest stage in Hollywood. And somehow it worked. In a night full of polished moments, Jessie Buckley gave us something rare. Not perfection, not control, but truth. And maybe that is why she won. Conan O'Brien, the man who turned chaos into comedy. Before the awards, before the tears, before the history-making moments, there was Conan O'Brien. And let's just say he did not walk onto that stage. He invaded it. Dressed in full character with ghostly makeup and a bright red wig, Conan kicked off the night like a man who clearly understood one thing. If you are going to host the Oscars, you might as well make it weird. And it worked. Within seconds, the audience went from elegant Hollywood mode to what is actually happening right now. But that was just the beginning. From jumping into scenes of nominated films to throwing playful jabs at celebrities, Conan moved through the night like a comedic sniper. Nobody was safe, not even himself. One minute he is roasting Timothée Chalamet, the next he is making fun of his own career like he just discovered self-awareness mid-monologue. And just when you thought it was all jokes, he slipped in something unexpected. A quiet shift into Spanish. A subtle political note. Blink and you miss it. But it was there. That is the thing about Conan. He makes chaos feel controlled. Even when things started going off script later in the night, awkward pauses, timing issues, even a tie award, he was right there turning potential disasters into punchlines. At one point, he joked that millions of Oscar predictions were just destroyed. And honestly, he was not wrong. In a night full of big stars and bigger moments, Conan O'Brien did something deceptively difficult. He kept the entire show together while making it look like it was barely holding on, and somehow that made it even better. Michael B. Jordan, the win that shifted the energy in the room. All night you could feel it building, the tension, the quiet competition, the unspoken question hanging over the biggest category. And when the moment finally came, it did not just land, it hit. Michael B. Jordan winning Best Actor for Sinners was not just a victory, it was a statement. Because this was his first Oscar, first nomination, first time stepping into that spotlight at this level. And somehow he did not just show up, he took it. Playing dual roles as Smoke and Stack Jordan delivered a performance that felt sharp, controlled, and just unpredictable enough to keep everyone watching closely. Like you were never quite sure which version of him you were about to get, and that was exactly the point. When his name was announced, the room reacted instantly. Loud applause, real excitement, the kind that cannot be faked. But if you looked closely, not everyone was celebrating the same way. Cameras caught subtle reactions, a little tension here, a quiet disappointment there, because this was a tight race, and Jordan had just pulled ahead at the last second. Then he got on stage. No overacting, no dramatic pauses, just gratitude, confidence, and that calm energy of someone who knows this is only the beginning. He thanked the people who believed in him, promised to keep pushing himself, and kept it real the entire time. In a night full of big wins, Michael B. Jordan's moment felt different, not just because he won, but because it felt like he just unlocked the next level. Cassandra Koulikoundis, the invisible architect finally seen. Most people watch a movie and fall in love with the actors, very few stop to ask who chose them, and that is exactly why this moment felt so unexpected. For the first time ever, the Oscars introduced a casting category, and suddenly the spotlight shifted to someone who has been shaping Hollywood stories from the shadows all along. Cassandra Koulikoundis did not just win, she revealed a role most people never think about. Her work on one battle after another was not loud or flashy, but it was precise. Every actor felt like they belonged exactly where they were, like the story had been built around them instead of the other way around. And that is not luck. That is instinct, the kind you cannot teach. But here is where it gets even better. Her journey with director Paul Thomas Anderson did not start at the top. It started as an intern, on his very first film. No spotlight, no guarantees, just years of quiet work building trust, learning the rhythm of storytelling from the inside out. And nearly 3 decades later, she is standing on the biggest stage in Hollywood, winning for casting his film. That is not just a career, that is a full circle moment so perfect it almost feels scripted. In a night full of actors, directors, and big personalities, Cassandra Koulikoundis reminded everyone of something important. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who decides who gets to be in it. Marlon Brando, the night an Oscar got rejected. Winning an Oscar is supposed to be the ultimate Hollywood dream, the kind of moment actors rehearse in the mirror for years, but in 1973, Marlon Brando flipped the script in a way no one in that room was ready for. After winning Best Actor for The Godfather, he simply did not show up. No tux, no speech, no emotional music swelling in the background. Instead, he sent Sachin Littlefeather to the stage, and just like that, the biggest celebration in Hollywood turned into something far more uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. Standing in front of a room full of the most powerful people in the industry, Littlefeather calmly refused the Oscar on Brando's behalf and began speaking about the treatment of Native Americans in Hollywood and the ongoing Wounded Knee protests. You could feel the energy shift instantly. Some people clapped, others booed, and many just sat there wondering how the night had suddenly turned into a history lesson they did not sign up for. Meanwhile, rumors spread backstage that John Wayne was so angry he had to be physically restrained, which honestly sounds less like an awards show and more like a deleted scene from a Western. And here is the part that makes it unforgettable. Decades later, most people cannot tell you who else won that night, but they remember this moment perfectly. Because while everyone else came to accept an award and thank their agents, Marlon Brando rejected the biggest prize in Hollywood and still managed to steal the entire show without even being in the room. Rob Lowe and Snow White, the opening that went completely off script. The Oscars are supposed to start with elegance, a smooth welcome that sets the tone for a night of prestige and celebration. But in 1989, things took a turn so strange it still feels like a fever dream. The show opened with an 11-minute musical number featuring Snow White attending the Oscars, which already sounds like a bold creative choice. And then Rob Lowe appeared and started singing with her like this was the most normal thing in the world. At first, the audience tried to go along with it, smiles, polite clapping, a few confused looks. But as the performance kept going, something shifted. It was too long, too awkward, too over the top in a way that made people question if they were watching the Oscars or accidentally switched to a completely different channel. The chemistry felt off, the tone felt off, and the entire room slowly sank into secondhand embarrassment that you could almost feel through the screen. And here is the best part. Even Rob Lowe himself later admitted it was a disaster, which tells you everything you need to know. What was meant to be magical turned into one of the most infamous opening numbers in Oscar history. Because sometimes in Hollywood, the biggest risk is not failing quietly. It is failing in front of millions of people while singing next to a Disney character and realizing halfway through that there is no escape. James Cameron, the line that divided the room. Winning an Oscar is usually a moment of humility, a chance to thank your team, maybe hold back a tear, and exit the stage with dignity. James Cameron had a slightly different plan in 1998. After winning Best Director for Titanic, a film that had already taken over the world, he stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the audience, and delivered a line that instantly changed the mood in the room. "I am the king of the world." Now, to be fair, it is a great line. It worked perfectly in the movie. But dropping it live at the Oscars was a move so bold that half the audience did not know whether to cheer or slowly sink into their seats. Some people loved the confidence. Others felt the secondhand embarrassment hit them like a wave. It was that rare moment where triumph and cringe showed up at the same time and decided to share the spotlight. But here is what makes it unforgettable. Cameron was not just celebrating a win. Titanic was dominating the night-breaking records and proving itself as a cinematic giant. In his mind, maybe he really did feel on top of the world. And honestly, after that kind of success, who would not be tempted to say it out loud? Still, the moment stuck. Not because it was perfect, but because it was human. A little too confident, a little too dramatic, and just awkward enough to live forever in Oscar history. Roberto Benigni, the chaos that turned into pure joy. Most Oscar winners walk to the stage. Roberto Benigni did not get that memo. In 1999, when his name was announced for Best Actor for Life is Beautiful, something completely unpredictable happened. Instead of calmly making his way to the stage like every other winner before him, Benigni exploded with excitement. And when I say exploded, I mean he literally climbed over the backs of theater seats like the floor had suddenly become optional. The audience froze for a second, trying to process what they were seeing. Was this planned? Was this allowed? Was security about to intervene? And then just as quickly, the confusion turned into laughter and applause, because what you were watching was not a performance. It was real, unfiltered joy. By the time he reached the stage, the energy was already out of control. His speech was just as chaotic, filled with passion, gratitude, and that same unpredictable spirit that made the whole moment feel alive. It was messy, loud, and completely unforgettable. And that is what made it so different. In a room full of carefully rehearsed speeches and perfectly timed emotions, Roberto Benigni gave something raw. No filter, no control, just pure excitement bursting out in every direction. Was it elegant? Not really. Was it chaotic? Absolutely. But years later, people still remember it. Because sometimes the most memorable moment is not the one that looks perfect. It is the one that feels real enough to lose control. Adrian Brody and Halle Berry, the kiss that froze the room. Winning an Oscar is supposed to be a perfect moment. You walk on stage, you smile, you thank everyone, and you try not to trip on the stairs. Adrien Brody had a slightly different idea in 2003. After Halle Berry announced him as Best Actor for The Pianist, Brody walked up looking overwhelmed, emotional, completely in the moment. And then without warning, he did something no one saw coming. He grabbed Halle Berry and kissed her. Live. On stage. In front of millions of people watching around the world. For a split second, time just stopped. The audience did not know whether to laugh, clap, or question reality. Berry herself looked completely caught off guard trying to process what just happened while still holding the smile expected on a stage like that. It was not rehearsed, not planned, and definitely not something the producers had in the script. And that is exactly why it became unforgettable. What could have been a simple emotional victory instantly turned into one of the most talked about and controversial moments in Oscars history. Some people saw it as spontaneous passion. Others saw it as deeply uncomfortable. And years later, the conversation still has not fully settled. Because in a night built on control timing and perfect image, Adrien Brody created a moment that broke all of it. Not polished, not predictable, and just awkward enough to live forever in Hollywood history. The envelope mix-up. The mistake that broke the Oscars. Everything was perfect. The lights, the music, the final award of the night. Best Picture. The moment every film waits for. And when the envelope was opened in 2017, La La Land was announced as the winner. The cast rushed the stage, smiles everywhere, speeches began, emotions running high. It looked like the perfect Hollywood ending. And then something felt off. At first it was subtle. A few confused faces, people whispering, someone checking the envelope again like they just realized they might have read the wrong text message out loud. And then suddenly chaos. Producers stormed the stage, voices overlapping, and the truth came crashing in. Wrong winner. Moonlight had actually won Best Picture. What followed was something you almost never see at the Oscars. Celebration turning into confusion in real time. Speeches being cut off. Winners standing there holding their trophies, slowly realizing the moment was slipping away. And then just like that, the spotlight shifted to a completely different film. The audience was stunned. The internet exploded within seconds. And somewhere backstage, someone was definitely reconsidering their career choices. It was awkward, it was shocking, it was painfully human. But that is exactly why it became unforgettable. Because in a night built on precision and perfection, the Oscars reminded everyone that even the biggest show in the world can still make the biggest mistake. Will Smith and Chris Rock, the moment that stopped the world. The Oscars are built on scripts. Carefully written lines, rehearsed reactions, perfectly timed jokes. But in 2022, something happened that no script could have predicted. It started like any other moment. Chris Rock on stage delivering jokes, the audience laughing, everything moving smoothly. Then he made a comment about Jada Pinkett Smith. A quick joke. The kind that usually passes in seconds. But this time, it did not. Out of nowhere, Will Smith walked onto the stage. At first, people thought it was part of the show. Maybe a bit. Maybe planned, and then it happened. A slap. Real, loud, unmistakable, and just like that, the entire room froze. You could feel the shift instantly. The laughter disappeared. The confusion hit. Chris Rock stood there trying to process what just happened while millions of viewers around the world realized at the exact same time this was not scripted. Then came the silence, followed by tension, words exchanged that made everything even heavier. And suddenly the Oscars was no longer entertainment. It was something raw, uncomfortable, impossible to look away from. In a night meant to celebrate film, this single moment took over everything. Not because it was planned, but because it was real. And sometimes reality hits harder than any performance. Jennifer Lawrence, the fall that stole the spotlight. Everything was set up to be perfect. The name announced, the crowd rising to their feet, the cameras locked in on Jennifer Lawrence as she made her way to the stage to accept her Oscar. It was supposed to be a flawless Hollywood moment. Elegant, emotional, unforgettable for all the right reasons. And then Gravity had other plans. Halfway up the stairs in that massive gown that probably weighed more than her entire award, she tripped. Not a small stumble. A full, undeniable fall right in front of millions of people watching live. The kind of moment that would haunt most people forever. But here is where everything flipped. Instead of panic, instead of trying to hide it, she laughed. Got up. Kept going. And somehow that single imperfect moment became more memorable than the win itself. The audience did not just applaud, they connected. Because suddenly this was not a distant movie star on a perfect stage. This was a real person having a very human moment under very unforgiving lights. And just when you thought it could not get more ironic, she stumbled again the following year. At that point, it stopped being an accident and started feeling like a running joke the universe refused to let go of. Because in a night built on perfection, Jennifer Lawrence proved something far more powerful. Sometimes the moment people remember most is the one that was never supposed to happen. John Travolta, the name that echoed louder than the applause. Some Oscar moments are carefully rehearsed. This one went off script in the most unexpected way possible. In 2014, John Travolta stepped onto the stage with a simple mission. Introduce Idina Menzel. That is it. A name. 2 words. Easy. And then it happened. Instead of saying her actual name, Travolta confidently delivered something completely different. Not slightly off, not a small mistake. A brand new name that no one in the room had ever heard before. For a split second, the audience froze, trying to process whether this was a joke or if reality had just glitched. Idina Menzel, to her credit, handled it like a professional. She smiled, performed, and carried on. But outside that theater, the moment exploded. The internet grabbed it instantly, turning that mispronounced name into memes, jokes, and references that refused to disappear. And here is where it gets even better. The following year, both of them returned to the stage together. This time, Idina flipped the script and playfully mispronounced his name back. A perfect, subtle revenge that landed exactly the way it needed to. Because in Hollywood, you can forget lines, miss cues, even trip on stage. But say someone's name wrong on live television and it might just follow you forever. Amy Madigan, the comeback no one saw coming. 40 years. Let that sink in. While most Hollywood careers rise, peak, and quietly fade, Amy Madigan just pulled off the kind of twist that feels like it was written by an overly dramatic screenwriter on 3 cups of coffee. When her name was announced for Best Supporting Actress, the room didn't just clap, it exploded. Because this wasn't just a win, it was history knocking loudly and saying, yeah, I'm still here. Her role as Aunt Gladys wasn't supposed to dominate the night, but somehow it did. With a performance that balanced wild humor and sharp emotional edges, Madigan turned every second on screen into something you couldn't look away from. The kind of character that makes you laugh and then question your life choices 5 seconds later. And then came the speech. Instead of a polished PR-approved moment, Madigan gave us something far more dangerous honesty. She joked about shaving her legs the night before because apparently even Oscar winners panic last minute, stumbled through her thoughts, and then boom, hit everyone right in the heart. Her tribute to her husband Ed Harris wasn't just sweet, it was real. Messy, long-lasting, deeply human love. At 75, Amy Madigan didn't just win an Oscar. She reminded everyone in that room and watching at home that sometimes the best stories don't happen fast. They take 4 decades to land the perfect ending. Paul Thomas Anderson, the quiet genius who took over the night. No loud entrance. No over-the-top speech, no viral moment, and yet somehow Paul Thomas Anderson walked away as one of the most powerful forces of the night. That's the thing about him. While everyone else is busy chasing the spotlight, he's busy owning it without making a sound. Winning both Best Director and Adapted Screenplay for one battle after another. Anderson didn't just collect trophies, he quietly built a legacy right in front of everyone. And the wildest part? He still looked like a guy who wasn't entirely convinced he should be up there. While most winners are busy thanking half of Hollywood and their childhood pets, Anderson kept it simple, almost suspiciously humble, like a man who just accidentally discovered he's a genius. But make no mistake, this wasn't luck. This was precision. Every frame, every line, every choice in his film felt intentional, calculated, almost surgical. The kind of storytelling that doesn't scream for attention but slowly traps you until you realize you can't look away. And here's where it gets interesting. While the night seemed like a battlefield between sinners and one battle after another, Anderson played it like a chess master. No drama, no noise, just checkmate. Because in a room full of stars trying to shine the brightest, Paul Thomas Anderson proved something far more dangerous. You don't need to be the loudest when you're the smartest in the room.